Thank you for inviting me to your party. You know, I want to clear up something, though, before I get started into my talk. Every once in a while, they ask about who started the Tea Party. And somebody said at one time that, you know, I might be recognized as the father of the Tea Party, but I want to straighten that out. I have never claimed I am the father of the Tea Party movement, but I do claim I am the father of the junior senator from Kentucky. Well, one thing, it's great to be out of D.C. It's good to get back to America. And actually, I really mean it, because I get energized when I leave D.C. Sometimes that's depressing. It's not as depressing as it used to be. You know, a couple of years ago, the Tea Party movement, people like you have gotten energized, and you sent us some help. And believe me, it's a lot nicer in D.C. than it was a few years ago. But that doesn't tell you that we have our problems solved. But believe me, our problems are great, and they're expanding, and we have to be prepared to take care of them. Sometimes people think that all we have to do is get a few more votes and pass this bill and cut the spending and everything's going to be all right. I think it's much worse than that. I think the deficit that we're dealing with and the momentum behind the spending is so overwhelming that this is only going to be turned around with a major, major event. And I've worked on this assumption for a long time, because it was back in 1971 when it was declared that the pseudo gold standard was no longer viable. And they separated our dollar from gold completely. And since that time, look at any chart from 1971 on. Spending skyrockets, deficits skyrocket, size of government skyrocket, our involvement overseas skyrocketing. Our attacks, the attacks on the American people here at home on our civil liberties, it has skyrocketed. So it can be dated back until the early 1970s. But the truth is, it won't last. The problem that occurred back then was unmanageable monetary policy over several decades, and that brought the downfall of the so-called gold standard at that time. But it does introduce the notion of a very important part of what we have to deal with, and that is, how did we get into that financial and monetary mess? And it came from the Federal Reserve System, and we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve System. You know, I understand there's been a lot of talk at the convention about which is the best tax system. And quite frankly, I don't know which is the best tax system. All I argue is that I don't want any income tax. I want very little taxation. And the only way you can get that is if you agree on cutting the spending. Cutting the spending is the key to it. But all the discussion about the taxes are too high, spending too high, deficits too high, that's all very beneficial, but eventually we have to come up, you know, with a solution. Now, I don't think it's all that difficult. Sometimes I take it for granted that everybody knows what the solution is. How did we get into this mess? Well, we got into this mess because we were careless. The people were careless. We allowed the wrong kind of people to take over our government. We allowed them to vote for all the spending, and we allowed too many people to go to Washington that did not ever take their oath of office seriously. If that's the cause, why shouldn't the solution be sending only people to Washington who take their oath of office seriously and obey the Constitution? If that were the case, what kind of government would we have? We'd have a very small government. We would not be the policemen of the world. We would not be telling you how to run your daily life, and we would not be running the economy. We would be protecting liberty, and that would be our sole purpose in existence in Washington. Provide for a national defense and allow the people to take care of themselves. You know, I love this this position. As a matter of fact, I had a bill. Of course, I haven't met very many people outside of Washington who liked Obamacare. But opting out of the system is a good idea. At least that's halfway. You don't get rid of all, but just allow yourself the right to opt out. But why can't we opt out of the rest of the government that overbearing's on us too, and just say, let them leave us alone? You know, right now, today, the news is not good about inflation. All you have to do is read the daily paper today. Commodity prices are soaring. What's happened to energy prices? They're soaring. And you'd think they'd say, oh, well, maybe prices are going up because the value of the dollar going down. But, you know, that's not the case. Today, I saw on TV, they were explaining why prices were high. Well, it was the weather. Foreigners were buying too much stuff. The labor costs were up. People were making too much profit. Never once did they say, well, the prices are going up because the value of the dollar is going down. The value of the dollar is going down because the Federal Reserve prints too much money. You know, and there's no reason why you can't relate the deficit to the monetary policy. Yes, you can have deficits with a sound monetary system. Matter of fact, that was one of the shortcomings, from my viewpoint, in the Constitution. They allowed borrowing. The federal government was allowed to borrow. But let's say we didn't have the Federal Reserve, and we had big government. They're spending too much money. They tax. They know there's a limit to the taxation because eventually it drives down economic growth. There's nobody left to tax anymore. Then they would have to borrow. Well, they're borrowing an awful lot now, but interest rates haven't gone up. That's because of the Fed. Now, if you didn't have a Fed and Congress spent too much, interest rates would go up and they would have to quit. So I call the Fed the great facilitator. Without the Fed, you can't be financing undeclared, unwinnable wars around the world, and you couldn't finance the unsustainable welfare state. So you need to deal with the monetary system and the Federal Reserve. This is why I'm encouraged a whole lot with people like you. And last year, you know, we had this little bill, transparency of the Federal Reserve, the audit the Fed bill. You know, we ended up with every Republican congressman supported the bill, and a lot of the Democrats. We actually got it passed through the House. So transparency of the Federal Reserve is an issue that transcends and is bipartisan, and a lot of independents support this because we live in an age now where the people are waking up. They're sick and tired of the government stealing our privacy, and all they do is protect their secrecy. We want to know what the government's doing, and we want our privacy back. Now, if we expect to get our privacy back, we have to be very careful in the laws that we pass. After 9/11, you know, there was a lot of fear, and a lot of people were frightened, and a lot of people said to me personally, I know how you feel about this, Ron, but these are tough situations, and we have to give up some of our freedoms for our safety. And I agree. I say baloney. You never have to give up any liberty to be safe. Matter of fact, when you do, you're less safe, and that's where we are today. Our government doesn't protect our privacy, but it doesn't do the other things they're supposed to do. They're supposed to provide for a strong national defense. We spend more money than everybody else in the world, but I don't feel safer. Matter of fact, what I see is happening in the Middle East and around the world, it's endless spending, it's endlessly propping up of the military-industrial complex. It's just looking around for picking which dictator that we're going to support. Just think, we pumped in $70 billion propping up Mubarak. And now we're just looking around for the next dictator to prop up. I don't believe in any foreign aid and propping up anybody else. Let them pick their own leaders. Last week we had the continuing resolution. We had some votes. They were important, but they weren't major to cut back. We cut back a little bit. But if you look at the votes, we had a lot of amendments. There were 700 filed. I don't know how many we voted on. But some of them we couldn't get more than 100 votes on. There was one, I think it was around $100 million to cut infrastructure building in Iraq. And we got 100 votes. You know, we can't even take care of ourselves at home, and we're worrying about building bridges over in Iraq. Now, if you want to identify earmarks, I'd say let's go after those kind of earmarks and spend that money here at home. But another responsibility of the federal government, they're supposed to protect our borders. But we're around the world trying to establish borders and remake the Middle East and do all these things, and yet our own borders aren't protected. So if we had a proper functioning federal government, we would be dealing with our own borders here and enforcing our own laws and worrying a lot less about what's going on overseas. The crisis that we face now is a crisis, it's going to be demonstrated, it's going to come about as a financial crisis. We've had a financial crisis of sort, but it's only beginning because they've been able to prop it up to a degree. They have been able to once again put in the money to bail out the guys that have been making a lot, bail out the banks and the big corporations, bail out the military-industrial complex. And who got stuck with the bad stuff? The people got stuck with buying up all those worthless assets. And now the consequence of us buying up and paying for worthless assets with funny money, the consequence is now inflation. Anybody in this room remembers the 70s? It was a bad decade. It was the consequence of the breakdown of Bretton Woods when I got involved in politics. Well, the 70s were bad. They called it stagflation. Prices were going up and the economy was hardly growing, if growing at all. But today, the economy really isn't growing. If the economy was growing in the true sense of the word, we wouldn't have this huge unemployed group of people out there. Our government tells us it's 9%, 9.5% or whatever. But you know what? If you count everybody, like some free market people do, it's 22% of the people that are unemployed. And under these conditions, much worse than the 70s, on these conditions, you have this market deflationary force trying to say, back off, liquidate debt, cut the spending, balance the budget. You have the government doing exactly the opposite. Spend more, build more houses, keep prices high, never let labor costs go down. So they're coming into conflict. They're coming into conflict under much worse circumstances. And we're going to get hit with two things, and I believe we've started already. There'll be two things that will be the tax that will be more vicious than what you have to send into the IRS. One will be the inflation tax that you have to pay, and the other tax will just be the burden of big government. You're going to have to pay, and one way you will have to pay is, in spite of this horrendous power the Federal Reserve has to have manipulated interest rates lower than they should have been for so long, what happens is interest rates are going to go up, and they won't be able to control them. And interest rates have already just started to go up. So the people, once again, will be hit with higher interest rates and higher inflations and a weak economy. And if you think people are upset now, they're really going to get upset. They're upset in Wisconsin, but they're upset in a lot of other states. They're upset around the world, and it's all related. People, you know, we'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they're fighting for their liberties and free elections and all. But you know what? A lot of them are fighting and angry and upset. They've tolerated dictators for 40 years. Why are they all of a sudden upset? Food prices are going up. Their jobs aren't there. I've often said, half-kiddingly, that you know, some people said you vote from your heart or you vote from your head. I think most people vote from their bellies. And when your belly's empty, you get angry and upset. And that's what's happening in the world. And we see no signs that true economic growth is coming. The people in Washington now believe economic growth comes from government spending and printing press money and passing out money. And all that does is get people to spend money, live beyond their means, and then it comes up with the inflation. Unless a country depends on hard work and effort, savings with a sound economy, and then investment, you have to have production. But because we have been doing it the wrong way for 30-some years, guess what? We had jobs leave this country. So we have lived off the benefits of being the reserve currency of the world issuer. We've been issuing the paper money and everybody has taken it, but they're not going to take it much longer. There's not an easy option with the other currencies. Just to go and buy euros or yen is not the solution, because we, in the last 40 years, have orchestrated a worldwide inflation based on the dollar. So what will happen is all the currencies will go down in value, prices are going up, and that's what's happening overseas. So in the next week, in the weeks to come, you're going to hear a lot about energy prices going up because of other reasons than the Federal Reserve. But they did that in the 70s. It was always the embargoes that caused the interest rates to go up. But they were going up because the dollar was going down. It's just the excuse to do it, and to raise the prices. So when this comes, you, especially because you have engaged in this debate, and I wished I could say you were the majority, but we are still the minority. But remember, an irate minority can accomplish a whole lot when you're determined to do it. But you have to know what the alternative will be. The Constitution is a good place to start. Sound money is another place. Balance the budget by cutting spending. Reject the notion of the empire. Reject the notion that we need the Patriot Act to make us safe. Reject the idea that we have to take care of everybody. Believe in liberty. That is the qualifier. If we believed in ourselves and in liberty, we have lost our confidence in it. And liberty has to be restored. 100 years ago, we as a country took liberty and chopped it into pieces. We talked about personal liberty and economic liberty and then a foreign policy all over the place. It's all one piece. Your personal liberty and your economic liberty is the same liberty that gives you your right to practice your religion and lead your life as you so choose. It's all one piece. We want a free society because it releases creative energy. That's what we need. We need the government to deal with the general welfare, but it isn't redistributing wealth. The general welfare means sound money and private properties, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the whole works. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But liberty is the instrument that allows us to strive. You know, when government strives to make us better people and make the world better, it doesn't work. They do it at the expense of liberty. Today, it's the release of that burden of big government that we have to get so we can get back to where we came from, peace and prosperity and the American dream. Thank you.